So without further ado, oh yes, the other thing we wanted to say, sorry, is the recordings will be available. So if you wanted to share them with other colleagues and that kind of thing, we're just working out the details of where we're going to have the recordings saved, but we're just going to work out where which website we're going to put them on and how we'll distribute them. So we when we send out your certificates, that's when we'll let you know where the recordings are, and you'll be able to review them again, or else, you know, give them to other nursing colleagues who may be interested, in this case, in publishing from their masters. The other thing to say is at 3:30, you know, please feel free to leave. We went over last week and it was really interesting discussion. I'm happy to stay on past 3:30, but of course I understand you're busy clinicians and you have to get back to the wards or wherever you are. So of course I understand if you need to run off at 3:30 or at any time. That is absolutely okay, and I'm not going to take it personally. And then the final plea is for feedback, because, you know, Maria and I sat down in March wondering, was it the right time to do this, and was this the right content, and we've kind of had our best guess at trying to work out what people might need in order to make nursing research happen, and this was our best attempt at that, but we're very happy to take feedback and listen to your experiences with us. So please do you know, give us whatever feedback. We've thick-skinned and we can handle it, whatever it is. So publishing from your MSc, the first thing to say is, why would you bother? You've just finished your MSc and it's hard work, and now I'm saying, and there's another thing you have to do. Well, it's really important that you publish, that you disseminate whatever you've done in some way, and maybe it doesn't necessarily mean publication, but it could be dissemination in many different ways, but publications is one of the ways. And publications are important because they're read by other people within the profession, and and as I said last week, building on that, it's really, really important for the profession that we develop new knowledge and that we constantly update that knowledge, because the context is not standing still. So that in order for that to happen, we need to publish and disseminate the research that we've done. It's also really good for your career, whether or not you fancy stepping into academia or into education in any other way. It's a really good thing to do for your career, because it shows that you have, you know, a real get up and go, and that you know, willing to make that final step and close the research kind of circle, if you like. I also feel quite strongly that out of respect for the participants, you should try to disseminate. I mean, I really do feel that a master's is about mastering your techniques that you learn and mastering a subject. So it really is about your development. But at the same time, oftentimes we take some time of other nurses or other healthcare professionals, or even patients or the public, and we take their time, and I think it's kind of gracious of us to try and make the very best of whatever we get from people's time that they've given us. It's respectful that we use that data to the very best of its ability, that it doesn't just languish somewhere on a shelf after it's been read by the examiner, and maybe your partner or your mother or who else ever is kind enough to read your opus. I do want to say though, before I kick off, there are very few fields where you put yourself out in the way, in the written form, in the way that we do when we try to publish. And all the way through this part of this talk, I'm going to be talking about the emotions involved in trying to publish, because it's a really difficult thing to do. And I do think you need to be kind to yourself, and you need to be realistic when you're choosing the journal that you're going to target. So I have, the PowerPoint is loosely built around these 6 steps, and the first one is identifying a target journal, and I'm going to tell you some things I've learned along the way around choosing the right journal. And then the second step is becoming familiar with that journal and all of its specifications. And the journals are brilliant these days. They often have little kind of clips that you can look at, and they tell you exactly how to get published in that journal. And obviously, once you've chosen your journal, the thing to do is to soak up all the information that that journal gives you about how they expect, what their scope is, what they like to publish, and then read that journal and look for familiar articles within that journal. And then you've got the actual preparation of the manuscript, which I'll talk about, proofreading and asking for feedback, submitting and waiting, and then dealing with the reviewer's comments and correcting the manuscript. So that's how I'm going to there's another Maria, I don't know if you have Catherine McGarvey's email address, but she's just emailed me there to say she's trying to log on and she can't. So I don't know if you can send her the link. I probably can't do it at the same.
I can't. Do you have her email address off the top of your head?
Yeah, she is CMC Garvey, GARVEY @matter.ie.
Okay, I'll deal with that.
Great. Okay, so they're the steps that I'm going to talk through. So let's start by identifying the journal. Maybe I can move us all out of the way a little bit. So the first thing to do when you're thinking about the thesis that you've written is think about what audience would be interested in what you've written. Is it a very local issue? Is it a national issue? Or is this information that you've found out, is it truly internationally relevant? And you have to be very honest with yourself when you're thinking that through. Is this absolutely groundbreaking, internationally important? And if not, what part of it is important nationally or locally? And then you target the type of publication that will really be interested in what it is that you have to read. And I'll say a little bit more about that when I'm talking about impact later on in this slide. So the other thing is there's a range of nursing journals. You know, you will have heard of the Journal of Advanced Nursing, Journal of Clinical Nursing, these, and I have got a kind of a list of those that I'm going to bring up in a second. But the other thing that you might think of is, you see, my area of publication is dementia, so I would very rarely actually publish in a nursing journal. I would normally target dementia, which is a journal called Dementia, and that's multidisciplinary. So if you're a pain nurse, that might be something you do, you know, you target a particular pain journal and that's multidisciplinary. If you're, you know, the same with intellectual disability, there's a couple of journals that would be very much kind of interdisciplinary and have the focus on an area rather than on nursing as such. So there's a number of different ways of thinking about the subject that you're interested in, and if it's a specific subject with its own, neuroscience is another one, that could be one that you would target a multidisciplinary journal for rather than a nursing journal. Whereas if you've done something that's really very much about the role of the nurse, then you might want to target one of the more generic nursing journals. So that's something I'd advise you to perhaps chat with your supervisor about, and you know, really look at when you're looking through the journals and trying to make your choice about which one is right for your findings. I think that's a really important distinction that you make. Is this a general nursing piece of work, or is this something that has a very specific area that is targeted to this? And then that's one of the considerations. And I've written these considerations in no particular order. They're all kind of as important as each other. So the next thing I would think about is, well, which journals come up multiple times in my own reference list? So if you're in a particular area and your references all come from, say my area in dementia, a lot of my references and the things I write come from older people, nursing, or dementia, or Journal for Alzheimer's and Dementia. So I know that they're real good possibilities for me and depending on the nature of what it is I'm publishing on dementia, I might choose one or another. So if it's very if it's got multidisciplinary appeal, I would go for dementia. But if it's kind of much more nursing focused, so I did one recently that was about dementia education, so I went for nurse education today because I felt that had a broader, that piece of research, even though it was about dementia, it had a broader appeal than just dementia. So I chose that one. And just also, I think, a word about open access. So you may have heard about open access. It's a real buzzword at the moment. And it's really important because it does, sometimes the college that you've done your master's in has an arrangement with particular open access journals or kind of groups of journals where the college pays the fees, but to enable you to have open access, there is usually a charge, and oftentimes that charge is waived for students. So it's really important that you look at it, and normally when you're looking at them, they'll have a little lock and key next to them, some kind of icon of a lock and key, and then you know it's an open access and you have to pay to unlock the key. Now that doesn't mean you're paying to get published, it's still peer reviewed, and you know, you still have to go through that system of writing a cover letter and all that I'm going to come to, but it does mean that there's some money that has to come from somewhere, and there are other options of how you get there. If you have chosen not to do peer review, then lots of universities have open access that you can send your not quite finished proof to. In DCU we have a thing called Doris, and that effectively makes all my papers open access within DCU. So if I want to share them with other people, I can do that, but it just has to be not quite the finished proof. But your librarian in wherever you work can advise you more about what the deal is with open access within your institute where you were. And you know, there's a high feeling about this open access stuff and whether it's right or whether it's wrong. And you know, it's quite controversial, but it does seem nonetheless to be the way things are going in publications. As a reviewer, which I think might be an interesting perspective for you, because I review for Nursing Ethics and a number of different journals, and as a reviewer, I think it's really kind of, it galls me a little bit that they're charging you, but they don't pay me to review. They're charging, you know, so they're basically just charging their own fees for administration, but you know, I might spend half a day reviewing a paper if it's complex, and I get nothing for that, and I do that for free. And then so I feel that like if people need to publish their work, it should be for free, because the community provides all of that work for free. It's not about me wanting to be paid, that's not it. It's that I feel I do that for the community, and then the publication should be free. But hey ho, this is the way of the world. So open access is with us to stay, and it does need negotiating some ways. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is impact factor. So this is another very, very controversial thing. Some people say, and even some funding organizations have said they will no longer look at impact factor, and when you apply for jobs in those institutions, you're not allowed to talk about the impact factor of your publication list. You're not allowed to talk about your H index. You're not allowed to talk about what kind of things journals you've published in. So it can be really, really kind of controversial. I suppose some people feel like impact factor is a numerical way of saying how good your paper was, and it's calculated from how many times your paper has been cited by another paper. meaning that if it's cited a lot of times, then it's a really good paper that lots of people read and was important for their research, so they referenced you. But there's so many ways of gaming that system, and there are groups of researchers who reference each other all the time to try and get each other's impact factor up, and it's highly gamed, the whole system, and a lot of people feel like it's a load of rubbish, and we should no longer even countenance the idea that impact factor means anything other than here's some people who can game the system really, really well. So I do think it's useful for you to look at impact factor, or look at this obviously 4, because it's quartiles. There's 4 sections: quartile 1, 2, 3 and 4, and that's a basic ranking of whether they're the top journals in a field, the middle, you know, the 1, 2 or 3, and 4 is the bottom of the journals in the field, which they would be peer reviewed, but they would be kind of lower down the ranking. H index is another one, and I'm not going to tell you all because it's boring, but like each one of those is calculated in a different way, and each one of them can be gamed in a different way, and each author also has a H index, so I can look up my own H index and compare myself to other people, which I would never do because I just could not be bothered what my H index is. And you know, generally speaking, funding bodies and universities are starting to become very leery of these impact factors, but nonetheless they are important for you a little bit, at least to bear in mind that if you are thinking this journal is the journal for me, and then you realize it has a very high impact factor, so that could be anything in a nursing journal, that would be something with an impact factor of 2 or 1.9 or something that would be considered quite a high impact factor, or even around 1. So the Journal of Advanced Nursing, it depends where you read, because obviously they themselves quote their impact factor as one thing, and then if you look at other kind of organizations, they quote their impact factor as something else, because they may have used the last 2 years or the last 5 years in order to calculate the impact factor. So it's a little unreliable in that way, but anything around the 1, so like a 1 or 0.92 or something, I think Journal of Clinical Nursing might be around 0.89 or something like that. That's a good impact factor for a nursing journal. And when I say that, I'm not being disrespectful to nursing, it's just a thing that, you know, we would be behind in the whole gaming of the impact factors. So people in biological sciences and chemical sciences, they've been gaming the system for years, and some of them have impact factors of 9 and 10. And then you've got journals like Nature, which has a very high impact factor, and they would produce all the kind of high scientific discoveries on splitting atoms and goodness knows, you know, new discoveries about a new species and things like that. So they would have a very high impact factor, and nursing journals never have an impact factor that high, and that's, you know, it's not something we need as a profession, we need to worry about. But it is useful for you to have a rule of thumb that around the 1 mark is a good high impact factor, or top quartile is another good kind of impact. And I'll show you a website in a second where you can go and look where your journal that you're thinking of is on the quartiles or the impact factors. And the Scimago journal ranking, which is SJR, sometimes just abbreviated to SJR, that's another ranking system calculated a slightly different way. So I'm just going to show you those websites. What I'll do is I'll just stop share for a moment. There I am again, and then I'm going to reduce that, sorry. And here we go, journal ranking. And then I will share again, screen share, desktop share. I have to talk to myself so that I get it right. So can somebody come off my mute and just tell me that you can see this list of journals?
Yes, we can, Kate.
Okay, yes. So you'll be
Yes.
able to see there. This is, I just put in nursing miscellaneous, and you can put in whatever subject you want there, and then you get and this is using Scimago journal ranking, and so that's the SJR. It also gives you the H index, and it doesn't give you the any other of the indices, but it tells you that these are all top quartile nursing journals. So Nurse Education Today is one of the highest, and it has quite a high SJR ranking. But if you see Journal of Advanced Nursing, which is one that we in the whole scheme of things, we think that's a fairly good nursing journal to publish in, and that's 0.9. And it goes all the way down quartile to, this is one of those Nursing Open Plus. This is, see the little, you have to unlock, so that's one that you have to pay to have open access to. Open Nursing Journal, I'm going to show you a little bit about that, because I think that is quite interesting, because that's one of the journals that it waives the fee for graduate nurses who want to try and publish. So I'm going to show you that in a second. And I'm just kind of, you can see the country they come from as well. That can be sometimes interesting, and obviously if they're not in English, it's probably beyond any of us to try and publish in the Spanish one, or maybe not, maybe some of you. And it goes all the way down to quartile 4. There's Practice Nurse and Nursing Times. Now, another word I wanted to say about impact is it isn't all about the numbers, and please don't, when I say I don't even look at my own H index to see what citation index I have, it really couldn't bother me less, because impact to me is being read by nurses for a lot of what I try to publish. Now, some of that, the Nurse Education Today one, that's different. I want nurse educators to read that, so I try and publish somewhere where nurse educators might read that. But you see, impact doesn't just mean you've got loads of citations. It mean, if this truly is about us becoming a profession that has a really solid and well evolving shared knowledge base, then impact it means that nurses have to read it. And in that case, publishing in Nursing Times, if I was in the UK, maybe not here so much, is the place to go to have impact. And so I wanted to show you, I'll just bring this down, this the Open Nursing Journal. Now, it's not high impact, but at the same time, it does have a graduate students research section, and that is really good. I think, they are trying to champion. There's a lot of journals, so I've tried to publish with students a couple of times, and we've been told the sample size isn't big enough for this journal, go away. And that's a lot of what you'll get in those very kind of high citation factors, high H index quartile 1 journals. If you've done a master's with a qualitative master's with about 6 participants, they'll just tell you to go away. If you've done a quantitative study and you haven't reached statistical significance, then you probably won't be able to publish in one of the top quartiles. Obviously there's always exceptions, and that is, please don't take it as a blanket rule. And obviously if you have a supervisor who's saying to you this is publishable in the top quartile, then it's not all about the sample size, but it is a good guide for things. But nonetheless, even if you have a small sample size, you may have found really, really interesting findings that could spark an idea in another nurse, that could have a big impact on another nurse, saying, that's for me. So do you see, it's not just all about the impact factor, it's also about the impact, the clinical impact that might have, the way that might change some nurses' practice somewhere along the way, that nurse might read what you've thought and spent time really doing a lot of thought on, and say, well, you know what, I do that differently, and I'd never thought of it that way, and I really want to change my practice now. And sure, isn't that what that is what we're trying to do. So it isn't just about impact factor, it is about impact. And I really feel that this is a journal that would be read by other graduate students or other nurses who are interested in nursing research and interested in the subject. And I think that is a really good option if you're thinking about publishing. I won't say any more on that. I'm going to go back. I'm going to stop that share and then go back to my PowerPoint. Where have we gone, PowerPoint? Share screen. Desktop share. Okay. Are we back onto identifying the journal there?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So there's just a couple of links there that you might want to look at. That they're the two websites that I just put up. And the other thing to say is, once you do choose your journal, many of them, and the one I put up there, the Open Nursing Journal, is a case in point. They have a kind of a podcast that you can click in and listen to the editor talking about what they like to publish in their journal. So and a lot of the journals do that now, and that's really, really useful and absolutely vital. So so when you're choosing your journal, you need to really look at the information that's you need to, once you've get yourself a short list of 3 or 4 that you're thinking of, discuss them with your supervisor if that's an option open to them. I'm always happy if you want to contact me to discuss your choice with me. That's you can always email me, that's fine. But read the journal articles in that journal. That's the most important thing. So when you think you have your shortlist, you will decide on whether that's which one of those is the right one based on reading what they normally publish. And do they publish the type? So if you've done a case study, or let me see, one of the examples that came in was a formative evaluation. So if you've done a formative evaluation, that wouldn't be published in every journal. And it is always worth, when you think you've got your choice, writing to the editor, and whether that's an option for you will be in the information on that journal's website, and it will tell you whether or not you'd be welcome to publish, say, a case study, or whether you'd be welcome to publish a formative evaluation. Sometimes journals will just say, we don't touch that, we want original research and nothing else. Some journals will do reviews, some journals won't do reviews. Some journals will do reviews, but only if you've used one of those tools like Prisma, or for those of you who've done a review, you'll know what that is. It's really, really worth writing to the editor and saying, I've done a master's, I think that this is really important. I think this is the important nub of what I found. I really think that other nurses need to read about it. Would you be willing to publish such a paper in your journal? And because it's a lot of work to go through, and I've done this, believe me. I've thought, I've read all the last 5 editions of this journal, and it's very relevant to this journal, and I've decided I'm just going to put it in, and wish that I hadn't, because I've just got a letter back from the editor saying, thanks very much, but this is off kilter in this respect that I hadn't thought of. And then you have to try and go back to the process again. So a quick letter to the editor, always, if that's an option, it'll be written on the website, and that's always a good option to take. So you read and read from that journal, and you haven't even started thinking about your own masters yet, really, other than a couple of take-home points that you're going to use to help you think about whether it's publishable in that journal. And the next thing to do is, within the journal that you've chosen, try and find a similar article, an article that is similar to your study, that kind of gives you a similar feel. So it could be methodologically the same, or it could be that the scope of it is the same, or it could be that it's a case study and they've published other case studies. That's really important. So try and find a journal article in that journal that you've chosen that's similar in some way to you, because that is absolute gold dust when you come to the next stage, which is preparing your own manuscript. The other thing to say on that is, if that journal that you've chosen has just done a special issue, say it's around incontinence, and they've just done a whole special issue on incontinence, they're not going to publish something on incontinence in the next edition, unless it's the whole journal's about incontinence. obviously then that's different. But so make sure you do look at what they've been doing a lot of recently, because if they've done a special issue or a big focus on dementia or something, they're not going to publish something else on that subject in the next month, and it's going to probably take a few months before they're going to be interested in looking at that again. So, you know, keep all that in mind when you're choosing, because that really is the most important decision, that you choose the right journal and to maximize your chances of actually doing all this effort for some really valuable result at the end of it. When you're reading the similar paper to yours, it's really good because it gives you a guide of, well, what kind of percentage of this paper is written about the findings, what kind of percentage is written, because it won't tell you that in the guidelines that you read. It'll tell you, well, we want an abstract of 100 or 300 words. It'll tell you the whole article can't be longer than 2,500, or it can't be longer than 6,000, or whatever it is in that particular journal. It will tell you that, but it won't tell you within that 6,000 words what proportion of that should be your findings, and what proportion should be your methodology, and what proportion should be, and obviously there's differences between, you know, if you do a complex methodology such as action research, then you're going to have to write a bit more about the cycles of the action research, and it can take a few more words than if you've done a randomized control trial, when it's quite formulaic what you have to say about that and how you've controlled or how you've randomized, and then move on, because everybody knows kind of in those journals that publish RCTs, everybody knows how you publish, how you do an RCT within reason, and then you just have to specify what you specifically did in yours. So look at how the papers are structured and types of phrases. That can be really useful as well. If you look at the types of phrases that other authors use, you can go to school on that, and that can be really, really helpful ahead of you taking the next step, step 4. How am I doing for time? Okay, which is proofreading and asking for feedback. So again, check the journal specifications, get a friend or a colleague to review it for you. Look, I review for quite a lot of journals, and I get so cross when there are referencing errors, obvious referencing errors, or grammar errors or spelling errors. And, you know, for me to say that, that's quite big, because I have dyslexia, so I'm not great at spelling and I'm not great at grammar, but I do the reviewers the courtesy of checking all of that and having somebody else check it before I would ever send anything in to a journal. And when I'm reading something and I, a dyslexic, can see this is really bad spelling and grammar and referencing, then I get quite grumpy. And remember, reviewers, I'm going to say this a few times, reviewers do it for free, and it's on top of everything else that we're busy people, and like everybody, we're not more busy than other people, but it's on top of everything else. We do this reviewing and we do it for nothing, and they get no glory and no recognition for it. Not even the head of school or anybody recognizes that you're a reviewer. Maybe when you go for a job interview, it makes a line that you review for this, that, and the other, but everybody's like, oh, so does everybody else. So, you know, nobody really recognizes the work that you do in reviewing, and yet it's so important for the profession. And I have a word on you becoming reviewers as well later on. So yes, I'm not sure that there's much more to say about proofreading and asking for feedback. You know, at this stage, on stage 3, you take your dissertation and you have to read it again, and no matter how sick it makes you feel, and I know it does because I've been there, and you're like, I don't even want to look at this thing, and I know I have to read it again. You do have to read it again. I've missed a section. I've missed the preparing your manuscript. I'm sorry. This is really important. So when you are ready to choose your journal, you have to prepare your manuscript, and you have to find your dissertation. You have to read it through and try and answer the following 4 questions in as few as word as possible. So this isn't about writing a paper. This is just about you focusing your attention on what the whole point of this journal is, this paper is. So what is the research question? Why is that research question important? What are the main findings, and why are those findings important? Why should somebody care? You know, what that the bottom line is, you're going to make some arguments within this paper. In fact, the last session that, as shameless self-promotion, the last session that I'm going to do in this series is around academic arguments, is around kind of academic writing and making good arguments. So, but basically you're going to make some claims. You're at least going to make one claim, because it's not really publishable unless you're going to make a claim. So, you know, what claim are you making within this journal, and have you given us the evidence that you can make that claim safely? And why should I believe you about that? That's that question. What are your findings and why are they important? So when you've finished reading and editing, you've looked at a journal article that's similar, and you've kind of matched the word limits that gives you a guide for. Then you move forward, and then you do your proofreading and asking for feedback, which I've already talked about. I'm sorry, came out of order there. And then the final step is to submit, which is not quite as straightforward as you might think. So one of the things you have to do to submit is, normally these days you have to have an ORCID ID or an ORCID ID. I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's I have on the final slide I have the link to how you go to that. If you've never logged on and given yourself an ID, it is a unique identifier that ensures that another Kate Irving can't claim my journal articles as their journal articles. So I use that unique identifier when I publish, and if somebody else tried to claim, there's a couple of other Kate Irvings who do stuff in health research, probably in Scotland somewhere, and they couldn't claim my papers and I couldn't claim theirs, because whenever we submit one, we put in our ORCID or ORCID ID, and that means that we are uniquely linked to that. So it stops kind of fraudulent claims about whose paper is whose when there's a similar name or same name. So you usually ask for that. You are usually also asked for the code that the ethics committee gave you when you applied for ethical clearance to do your study. Now, if you didn't apply for ethical clearance to do your study, then it might be a problem publishing, because a lot of publishers won't publish without the reference number of the ethical approval and the name of the ethics committee where you got that ethical approval from. Now, obviously, that doesn't apply to if you did a review or secondary data analysis on some data that already existed, or a concept analysis, or a systematic review, or any of those sorts of things. So it doesn't apply to them, but it does apply to if you've done any primary data collection. Even if you've done it amongst nurses and not with patients, then there should be an ethics application. If what you did was practice development and you wrote it up in a large project, which some masters actually ask for now, it's a very kind of grey margin about whether you need to have ethics. You don't need to have ethics to do practice development, of course you don't, but then it might be difficult to publish if you've not got ethics. So these are sort of some of the things. It may be a bit late for me to be talking about for you guys now, but it's good to keep that in mind. And then there's the little matter of the cover letter, which always feels like the final insult when you've done all that work on making your manuscript, and now you've got to write a cover letter. So I just thought it would be interesting. I don't really need to talk these things through, but these are the sorts of things I would put in a cover letter when I'm writing to the editor to say, please find attached my publication entitled blah de blah de blah. If there's a special consideration, so for instance, I published one recently that did only have 6 participants, and all of them had dementia, and there was such a dearth in that field of the voice of the person with dementia that even though we'd done a multi-stakeholder interview, so only 6 of the people who were in this multi-stakeholder interview process actually had dementia, and we thought that their voice was being drowned out in the whole stakeholder review. So we made that one paper, and then we specifically did a paper around the voice of the person with dementia, and we did manage to publish it with only 6 participants, because there is such a dearth of the voice of the person with dementia on that specific issue, which was about their experiences in day centres and day hospitals. So so that was a special consideration. I thought that the editors should know, and I wasn't publishing in dementia, I was publishing in a management, community health management journal. So I didn't know that they would necessarily know too much about dementia. So I felt I should draw their attention to that. You know, this is what it's about, this is how we did it. If this is part of a bigger study and there are other submissions, make the editor aware of that, because there's nothing more annoying than them getting them in a different order and then realizing they should have sequenced the papers or something. So if there are other submissions on the same study, make them aware of that. Let them know how this is topical and relevant, and you might want to propose or oppose some reviewers, and that might be available in the journal that you choose or not, and that's something you have to read up on this when you've chosen your specific journal. Say for instance, I was writing something, well, no, one of our number is going to be writing something on therapeutic lying, and there's a particular in dementia, and there's a particular author who really is very pro therapeutic lying, thinks it's a brilliant thing, and all nurses should be taught to be better liars, and I'm very anti that position, and so is Shirley now. So we would choose not to, we would ask not to have him as a reviewer, because he's diametrically opposed to what we're saying. And you can say that, well, that's bad, you know, an impartial review should include all views, but it just would block, because if there's one reviewer who doesn't like the paper, then it would be blocked, and that's unethical in other ways as well. So you can, in certain papers, say, I don't want this person as a reviewer, I want somebody else as a reviewer, and you can sometimes propose the reviewers. Also, most journals are blind reviewers, so they wouldn't know my name and wouldn't be able to attach it. So you always have to be really careful you don't include your name or any of the author's name in the pages that get sent to the reviewers. So I'm wrapping up now, I promise. So bring any conflict of interest. So if you say you've evaluated a service and you own that service, say it's a private nursing service or something like that, you must make the reviewers aware of that, because it's highly unethical if you don't. So anything like that, maybe you have interest in a company and that you're evaluating something within that company, then you need to make them aware of that. And then the final, if you can just bear with me, I'll only be another couple of minutes, then we'll have a break. The final step is the gentle art of the rebuttal. This is something that has taken me a very long time to master throughout my career. It's not my plain speaking Northern English ways are to be very direct and to say, wow. And honestly, this is an emotional process. You are there putting your best foot forward with all your best ideas. You've read and read and read and written and written and written, and you've researched and you've talked and you've done sums up if you've been doing statistics or whatever you've been doing, but you've been doing it in a really focused way. And as I was saying to some of my students who've just handed in now, nobody knows much more than you in the country about this subject now. You know more about this than other people do, so you should feel very confident that you and it's true, because you really are steeped in a very narrow, albeit area, but you are steeped in that. And it's very difficult, you know, all that work, and it comes down to a page of somebody saying this isn't done very well and that's not done very well. And like I say, reviewers are varying in skill and varying in experience, and although usually they try to say something a bit positive, to be honest, you're so grumpy when you're doing these reviews because it's just on top of everything else, and like I say, no recognition for it, that really sometimes you just quite, and if the grammar's bad, or maybe sometimes they come from another country and the English is bad, and you just can be so grumpy that you're just saying this is not publishable for the following reasons. And you know, I wouldn't do that, but there are reviewers who just and myself and a PhD student had one that nearly made her drop out. She was so gutted by the comments, and they were comments that weren't entirely fair, but if it's blind, it's not personal. It's not an emotional exercise, even though it feels like one. It's an intellectual exercise, and you have to take a deep breath, put the critique away for a couple of days, take a deep breath and get over it, and then pick it up and then go, okay, what is in here that I can learn from? There is always something to learn in what they say. You know, even if they've totally picked up wrong what you did with the methodology, then is there something within that you could have been clearer about the methodology? I've only ever once, and that was with this PhD student, had a review where I really did feel they just haven't read it, because it's very, very clear. But in all other cases where I've had critique back and there's been critique of one thing or another, after mature kind of sitting back and looking at it, there was always something to learn from what the reviewers had to say. And be gracious in your reply. Do not be snooty in your reply, because that would just get the reviewers, you get the same reviewers again to review the changes that you've made. You can say that you haven't made a particular change for the following reason, but when you do that, when you don't just go along with what the reviewers ask you to do, you have to be so careful with your justification. I have done it and got away with it, and I have done it and not got away with it. So it's so important that you really that you're really kind of gentle with the reviewers, because they hold a lot of power, and you know, it might make you feel a bit better, but again, I warn you, it's not an emotional experience, it's an intellectual one. So try and make it that. Everyone I know who's ever written a paper and had a review gets comments back. My first paper I ever wrote, I didn't have any comments, just got published, and I thought, this is easy. It's never been like that for me since. I also had that with a PhD student, Emma O'Shea, who the first paper she wrote it and sent it in, and it got published, and all they wanted to do was change one of the side heading titles. And I was like, Emma, this never happens. Frame that letter, because that will not happen to you again. And it never happened again. And in fact, the very next one, she got an out and out rejection, didn't even want to see a review of it, which happens as well. So everyone gets cross with the reviewers' comments. It won't be just you, and you cannot put so much of your heart and soul into something and not be upset when what comes back is a page full of somebody saying this is rubbish and that's rubbish and this isn't great and that's not great. And it can be really brutal and blunt when it comes back to you. So a colleague of mine in Galway he's the manager for Tipperary hurling, and he'd say, well, Kate, if you don't want to play senior hurling, don't kit out. It's a hard thing that we do, that we put ourselves out there in this way. And I don't know many other professions where you're expected to do that. So give it some time, but not too long, because if you leave it too long, you'll lose the interest altogether. You've got to keep going with it a couple of days and then back on the horse and get riding again. Do think about the strength of the findings. If your findings are small, you can always add theoretical depth, and that will make it relevant. I've done that recently with a student with really good effect, and we've put it in, and we haven't heard if we've published yet, but I think that will publish. I have a good feeling about it. And again, I say be gentle with yourself. Go along with your supervisor and their advice, and you know, it's on them as well. So when I publish with a student, it's on me. The disappointment's also on me. It's a team, so it takes some of that off you. I'll send on the slides, but here's some interesting links that you might want to go on afterwards, but we'll talk about those a little bit after the break. I'm conscious I've run a bit over, so 15 minutes from now, just about be 1/4 past. So is that all right with everyone? We'll come back here at 1/4 past.